Welcome, everybody. We are back. It's been, I don't know, 3, 4 months. Feels like a long summer break, Nancy.
A long, hot, lonely summer without you, Julian.
It's always good to see you. And we are taking a slightly different tack on our leadership lessons from across the pond. But I'm sure we still will debate, challenge, interrupt each other, talk over each other,
Let's hope.
and have some fun along the way. So we're picking topics each week which have been trending in LinkedIn and obviously linked to organization, linked to leadership. So there's obviously, we're not going completely off beam. We're not talking about, I don't know, how to get to the moon or anything like that. We are keeping it quite on the ground in the sense of leadership. And so this week, we've picked a topic of that's been trending in LinkedIn about no pay for the office housework. And it's based on a report on women in the workplace done by Lean In and McKinsey and Company. And it was citing various aspects of how women senior leaderships are 60% more likely than male leaders to provide emotional support to their teams. And 26% are more likely to help team members navigate work-life challenges. And with the essence of these trending posts was all about while they're essential to organization, all these aspects, women are getting no recognition, pay, or promotions out of it. So, Nancy, what are your thoughts on the articles and posts that have been coming out on this?
Well, you summed it up beautifully, Julian. I mean, you took all my thunder.
Oh,
I'll try to find
I'm sure there's more to come.
I'll try to find something to say. I think that this touches issues that are largely about compensation, frankly, and incentivization, structures and processes within organizations. I think that talent review in general is going to go through some fairly seismic changes because of remote and hybrid. But to boil down that ocean, it's saying basically, what is it we value when it comes to a leader's performance? There are quote unquote hard metrics. I hate that term, but there it is, that are typically numerical. Did you hit this plan number? Did you exceed projected revenue? Did you cut costs? Things that are easily measured with a modern day slide ruler. Then there are the things that I think have for many years been derisively labeled as soft skills, be that empathy or inspiration or influence. Well, how do you monetize that when it comes to performance? You'll all have a conversation knowing who those leaders are who do them. And they may be the people want to work for, but unless it produces or can be linked to very concrete business results, and leaders aren't typically rewarded for it. And I think you have women who, in a way, that kind of work gets outsourced to. They're the ones who are expected to do everything from organize the office party, perhaps, to people go to for that kind of emotional support, especially during COVID. And if you're going to do the work, you should be paid for the work. So I think it also comes down to a question of, especially COVID and post-COVID, what is it that companies really value along with short-term shareholder return? And how are they going to pay for it and recognize it?
Because we know if you lead in a way that is providing that emotional support and that word empathetic leadership, we know that does pay dividends because it obviously helps the people. They feel more productive, more listened to. Their mental health perhaps is better, and therefore their results are better. So there is some, and I'm sure there's some articles and some measures out there that people have done. If you lead in an empathetic way, there is results driven out of it. The hard bits, the profits and the sales and all that sort of stuff. So I don't think anybody really questions that, really. I don't think they do.
I think they do, actually, Julian.
Do you think they do?
Yeah, I do, because I think the evidence is kind of fuzzy. And I think there are leaders who either A, are not very good at it and have never had to do it, So really think it's a lot of HR talk. Or B, sometimes have to make hard decisions and meaning adjusting perhaps their own style, or they have deliverables that have to be met from a board of directors. They're not going to stand in front of that board of directors and say, I really thought I should be more empathetic, because they believe it's a choice. It's an either or. So I think there are
Mm.
people who would argue with you about that. And I think that if business is good, it's easier to display those kind of integrative and connected
Mm.
behaviors. But if business is challenging, that's often, other than us, that's like the first thing I think companies cut are their patience to develop their people and to develop those skills themselves.
But do you not think COVID has sort of highlighted that there is huge benefits of this and has made it a bit more, I don't know, front of mind actually? Because I know years ago I was in an organization where we had performance reviews were a little bit more, they had the metrics, the what stuff, the objectives and the goal, that sort of stuff that were, did you deliver X revenue, Y profit, all those metrics, which are fine. But they also had what you call behavior metrics, the
Mhm.
sort of the how bit, how you went about it. And we had it sort of graded that they both counted, and they both counted towards your bonus. So you had to score equal. Sorry, they're equally weighted. I'm explaining myself properly here. So actually, if you might have hit your sales numbers, but you deemed you went about it in a really terrible way, hacked people off, and all that sort of stuff, and that went against you. And so even at the outset, it was about the what and the how, and both, which created that bit more of a balanced approach to how you delivered things. That you were a team player, you collaborated, you showed everything else. And I suppose, and it wasn't, as an American company, so it's it's fairly, I feel it was quite progressive. Then it was quite progressive, and so there's ways of doing it, of introducing the behavioral piece on a compensational basis as well. I think. What do you think about that?
I think it depends on how deterministic your culture is, meaning, have you decided we want to run the type of place where X matters? And then what do you do to make sure that that's reflected in most of the things you do? Because
Hmm.
I have a client, we spent a whole day talking about the culture they want to build. And the second day, the same company, the same leadership team said, well, yeah, that's very good, but how are we going to show that we can hit these numbers? And it was they weren't throwing the culture out with the bathwater.
No.
But those two things were not of one piece. I keep using this word integrated. They weren't integrated. And so I think that, of course, you can hold people responsible for behaviors, be they ethical or developmental or supportive, and you can reward them accordingly. That's great. You know, is that the kind of company that you are intentionally building? It's easier, I suspect, in some ways for a startup, even though they aggressively have numbers they have to hit for investors. I think
Hmm.
if you're working in a company that's been around for a while, that's of scale, in this case, perhaps size really matters. I think it's harder to make those things live. I think companies of that size are often very good at putting them on paper, but I'm not so. I hate, I guess I'm playing that cynic again. But these are all very good things. But I think until everyone in the organization who is a people manager, no matter how high they are in the hierarchy,
Hmm.
realizes that a core part of their compensation and their recognition will be on their emotional leadership of their people, which is kind of a new demand. I mean, that's wasn't really the standard operating procedure. So I think it is a big whole scale change in how we start to think about leadership. Not just because you want to squeeze the best performance out of your people, because often it was frankly about that, but
Hmm.
because that's what's important now. That's what's important as a company.
Hmm.
As companies are being asked to take social stands on issues, at least here in the US. But it's got to be company wide. It can't just be women who expect to do it because they do it at home.
Totally agree with you. I just, and we talked beforehand about making it more of a wider perspective. As you know, everybody has a responsibility. You know, if you're a people manager, it becomes part of your remit, and somehow, however they do it, you are. If there's a compensation link to it, then it's done in a way that can be monitored and observed and reviewed, and therefore, you know, paid accordingly. But like anything, you've got to put some form of whether compensation to change behaviours, or you have role modelling, which another way is changing behaviours. People observe positive impacts, or you put some form of, you know, it's some behavioural sort of grid that creates a review time or an ongoing one-to-one that ensures that you're abiding by these sort of processes and being very clear on the expectations of that. And I agree, it shouldn't be just, oh, well, that's what women do. That's just a terrible way to think about it. It's if you're a leader, you've got to look after everybody's well-being as well as hit the numbers and all that sort of stuff you have to do as well. It's a holistic, isn't it? That's obviously the ideal, but unfortunately, depending on the size of the company, you might have to put more harder measures in to create that change. And as all these things, it always starts at the top, doesn't it? In terms of any sort of behavior needs to be seen, and then therefore people believe it, and therefore then we'll start to act.
Well, I think we're living in a time. I just wrote a piece about toppling the hierarchy. You know, I think we're living in a time where there's a lot of pressure coming from lower ranks in the organization, and I thought it might be good to give people some practical ideas about how to embrace this big idea. If you notice that your peers as managers and leaders, they're the ones people are coming to, I think you should see what you can model for yourself. I would ask yourself, why aren't you the person they're coming to? So I think there's some individual development options in there. I'd say if you're a man, I would be especially sensitive to that. You know, are you using the women who are your peers or leaders as your emotional support buddy as well? You know, why don't you try doing it with another man? And maybe you are, you know, I'm not saying you're not. But, you know, in terms of sort of expanding and making this a core part of everyone's kind of profile as a leader, what kind of practical things would you suggest, Julian?
I guess it goes back to this putting things on pieces of paper, isn't it? On sort of, you know, making it very visible as part of your remit. I guess very clear of when you're leading a group of people. You know, whether you're a male or a female, your responsibility is for their well-being. That could be part of your thing. I think and that's quite a new thing. I think it's very easy to talk about, you know, responsible for sales or for marketing or whatever it may be. But actually, why don't we start looking at the people stuff? And it's perhaps taking some of the HR-y stuff that almost sits with HR and bringing it into that role, into that empowered leadership role, and say, actually, one of your parameters, your job spec is people's well-being.
You know, though, I know I'm interrupting you, but it just occurs to me there's a real risk here that we're not addressing, which is, well, very few of these managers are trained as psychotherapists.
I'm not talking about the detailed sort of therapy talk about. I'm talking about, you know, employee engagement, all the stuff that is important. You know, making sure people contribute. Well-being is all about making sure you're looking out for this whole piece about women being more involved in emotional support is the well-being piece. That's what it is.
I know, but I think we have to be careful, Julian, because I do know managers who people always come to and cry to and complain to. And there is a distinction, right? As you were saying about well-being, there's a distinction between someone being overly dependent on you as a manager for their well-being and owning their well-being themselves. So I guess what I'm saying is managers might need some training in this as well. Definitely. To understand where that boundary is.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying you should be a well-being expert. It's more about you've got to have an understanding and awareness of their well-being. You might be signposting them or empowering them to do stuff. I just think it needs to come with more of a high-level piece as opposed to, oh, that's what HR do or that's what women do. Actually, no, I've got to look after the whole person, as it were, as best I can with training. We are, as always, just run out of time. I don't know what's gone, 15 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. We will pick up something next week. Always good to speak to you, Nancy.
Always good to speak to you, Julian, but don't come crying to me.
No, I certainly won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.